Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek, insight from the reporters and editors that bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news. The Bloomberg Businessweek podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bloomberg Businessweek Weekend Podcast. Happy New Year. It's our first week of 2025, and as we enter the new year, we wanted to take a look into some of the key developments that could shape the next half-decade. From U.S. policy under a second Trump term, AI's insatiable demand for electricity harming the climate, to the decades-long battle to control what has emerged as the world's most critical resource, semiconductors.
So ahead on the program, we'll examine the year ahead, touching on Bloomberg Businessweek's annual 50 companies to watch, the next stage of AI use and adoption, and the top feuds that'll define 2025.
Dukes up, everybody, because they're going to come at you. Plus, our Bloomberg Pursuits team has the ultimate travel guide for the next 12 months, with help from the folks over at Kayak, who gathered billions of data points to give you personalized month-by-month estimates for the destinations of your choice.
All that to come. We begin, though, with the Bloomberg Businessweek Year Ahead issue for 2025. Each year, the Bloomberg Businessweek team provides a comprehensive outlook on the most important economic, business, technological, and geopolitical trends expected to shape the coming year.
According to Merriam-Webster, the dictionary, 2024 was the year of polarization. Political divisions affected not only the state of affairs within the United States, but safe to say also around the world. However, it's optimism that Bloomberg Businessweek editor Brad Stone wanted to focus on.
In the opening remarks of the Year Ahead issue, Brad gives us the optimist's guide to a chaotic world. We asked Brad why he chose to be hopeful for 2025.
It was a little tricky because, we had just subjected our readers to months and months of our political coverage, including our December issue, which was we produced the week after the result in the U.S. election with a full complement of stories about what the Trump victory meant. And so as we looked ahead in our annual year ahead package, really I wanted to stretch our arms a little bit to get beyond the politics story. So we've got this collection of stories about, for example, an interview with the Property Brothers, these great real estate influencers, this massive infrastructure project to keep carp out of the Great Lakes. Just all these stories. There's another good one from Tom Orlick, our chief economist, on what the Trump agenda means for the global economy and how it might not necessarily mean lower growth. So, anyways, taking a little bit of a different approach than we had in the past, and then and this informed my opening remarks, trying to maybe be a little bit more optimistic. I mean, if the new year isn't a time for optimism, then what is?
I love that.
Well, okay, so once you thought all this through for the year ahead issue, you do give us this optimist guide to a chaotic world. And you spoke to Harvard psychologist Steven Pinker, who kind of says, this is all our fault as journalists and writers of headlines.
Well, no. I mean,
am I projecting here? Am I projecting here?
He acknowledges that, the job of the news is to cover things that are happening, and things that are happening that deviate from the norm, can be negative things. But the point was that the norm is pretty good, and that there's no greater time to be alive. And you look at numbers like vaccines reducing infant mortality by 40% over the past half century, or Africa infectious disease deaths decreasing 42% since 2015. Even good news in terms of carbon emissions lowering, that these are things that we should pay attention to. And so that was sort of the framework that, however one feels about political changes in the U.S. or in Western Europe, that, there's a backdrop that is actually pretty rosy.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting, I have to say, reading through your column, I thought about, sometimes I get into a cab, typically in New York City, and it often is somebody that wasn't born here, and we start having a conversation. They're like, you have no idea how great this country is. And we'll talk about division or something, and they're like, you have no idea how great it is.
This is why your Uber rating is 1 star, Carol. Because
No.
I'm just kidding.
But I do think that's what you get to. And, when we cut, it's so easy for us to be in it day to day. And sometimes Tim and I go through a show, man, when we're like, wow, that was dark. But if you broaden out, right, the lens, we have made some really great advancements on a lot of different fronts, Brad.
And by the way, I didn't want to be completely apolitical. I mean, it is a time to be optimistic about a new presidential administration. I think we should give every incoming president the benefit of the doubt. And so, when it comes to, regulating nuclear energy, a technology that has historically made a lot of people squeamish, that's perhaps something to look forward to. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. gets a lot of attention for his unorthodox, shall we say, view on vaccines or fluoride in the drinking water. But, rethinking public health guidelines, looking again at ultra-processed foods in the food chain. I was in the mood to see the silver lining, let's say, and I think it's a good time to do that.
We'll talk a little bit about this sort of the Silicon Valley angle here with Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency and what that could actually do.
Well, I mean, look, let's, at this point, take them at their word that they're trying to make government more efficient, boost business activity, roll back the regulations that have made it difficult to build infrastructure, say, roll out high-speed trains. There isn't any reason to be complacent about the status quo in the United States when we look at how quickly other countries are able to do big things. And so, we should be, give Elon the benefit of the doubt. I mean, he's behaved a little bit like a blunt force instrument, but I was listening to Mark Andreessen on a podcast recently, and there has been a lot of frustration in Silicon Valley about their ability to develop new technologies. And so, look, their candidate was elected, and we're going to see if they can make a difference.
I just want to know, though, did you originally, when you started thinking about it, you're like, I'm going to write a column that, there's a lot of questions and it feels a little dark. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. Glass is half full, glass is half empty. I'm just curious if you did two versions of this, Brad.
I gave myself the challenge of writing a story with the headline, The Search for Optimism, or A Guide to Optimism. I just felt, and I don't know where the notion came from. You guys know I'm here in the Bay Area, so excuse me. There was a lot of hiding under the dining room table in my community, and so I wanted to look at things from a little bit of a different perspective.
Yeah, love it.
I want to hear a little bit about your thoughts on the tech firms kind of making the pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago just in recent weeks. We had Jeff Bezos down there earlier this week. There's probably nobody who knows more about Jeff Bezos than you. How would you describe a meeting like that with President Trump and sort of the context around that? President-elect Trump. Opportunistic.
I mean, look, there's no mystery around how to work with the federal government when Donald Trump is president. And, you go and you kiss the ring, so to speak, and he responds to that. And so we're seeing one CEO after the other go do that. Now, in Jeff's case, it was interesting because Elon Musk shows up at his table, maybe to his I no doubt considerable surprise. But, Jeff has a lot riding on this administration. Mm-hmm. He's got his company Blue Origin has the New Glenn orbital rocket sitting on the launch pad at Cape Canaveral, waiting to be approved. And so, he needs a partnership with this federal government, and probably not the kind of acrimony that existed between him and Trump during Trump's first term. And look, and Shu Chu, the CEO of TikTok, also going down there as he faces a deadline for ByteDance, the Chinese company, to sell TikTok. All these leaders know that the path to getting what they want is a little bit of sycophancy, and so that is why they are in Mar-a-Lago.
Well, great stuff as always. Happy New Year, happy holidays. Brad, always good to check in with you. We're looking forward to the new issue. Brad Stone, editor of Bloomberg Businessweek, author of many books, including Amazon Unbound. You are listening to Bloomberg Radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
When we think about the year ahead, one storyline worth paying attention to, the escalating trade war between the United States and China over the future of advanced semiconductor manufacturing.
Virtually everything, from missiles to microwaves, runs on chips, including cars, smartphones, the stock market, even the electric grid. In 2024, the Biden administration limited further advancements of China's semiconductor industry by blocking several companies from receiving exports of certain chip technology from China. Beijing responded by banning exports of critical minerals to the U.S.
Feels a bit frosty, to say the least. This tit-for-tat between the two global superpowers is set to grow even further in 2025. At least that's the expectations. This as President-elect Donald Trump has promised tariffs on Chinese goods. All of this while companies around the world try to adjust their supply chains. Needless to say, the stakes are high.
Someone who knows the semiconductor space well is Chris Miller. He's Associate Professor of International History at Tufts University, and he's the author of The Book on Chips, the New York Times bestseller Chip War, the fight for the world's most critical technology. He ties it to today's U.S.-China rivalry.
There are two big shifts happening simultaneously right now. One is the surge of spending on AI infrastructure, which means lots of very expensive AI accelerators in high-powered data centers. And two is the ratcheting up of tension around the U.S. and China, with the new administration in the U.S. planning to increase tariffs and controls on China's semiconductor industry. So those two trends are intersecting in ways that impact pretty much every company in the sector.
Where are we going to see that kind of line in the sand when it comes to selling technology to China? And then the big tech companies saying, but wait a minute, this starts to impact our business because China is a massive market.
I think if you talk to any CEO or executive off the record, and they'll say that my biggest problem is that China is both my largest customer and my number one competitor in most cases. And that, I think, structures how the industry deals with this issue and tries to lobby the U.S. government. They all sort of understand the logic of the U.S. government, understand that chips are key for AI, understand that AI is key to national security as well as economic prosperity, but they all also realize that they have really substantial markets in China. And so wherever you look in the supply chain of the makers of the tools that make chips, the manufacturers of chips themselves, they're all going to lobby, and they all have lobbied very successfully to keep their ability to sell to China open. And the national security apparatus, the Pentagon, the Commerce Department, the intelligence agencies are pushing for more restrictions than companies themselves want. And that's a balancing act that any president's got to balance. I think we've seen the Biden administration end up with a more lax approach than one might have expected, given their early tough rhetoric on this issue. And it'll be interesting to watch how the Trump administration addresses this balance. There will certainly be voices in the administration saying, let's focus on continued export to China of technology. It's important economically. But there will also be voices on the opposite side saying, if you export advanced technology to China, you're only giving China the capability to learn how to manufacture high-end chips domestically and eventually replace U.S. firms in the Chinese market.
Chris, with your understanding and knowledge of this world, are we right, U.S., the United States, right to be concerned about exporting technology to China? We've certainly seen this play out where things get exported, the technology, and China becomes really good at doing things. We're seeing it kind of play out in the EV market as we speak. So I'm curious, how concerned should we that we will export our expertise, our knowledge, and lose, control of another industry?
I think it's worth noting that China only imports a couple of types of manufactured goods: semiconductors, semiconductor manufacturing equipment. Those are the two largest categories of China's manufactured good imports, because China can produce everything else it needs domestically when it comes to manufactured goods. And I think that speaks to China's capabilities in this sphere, which means that the more capabilities you give to China, the more they're going to be able to use those to replace Western firms. And their desire to replace Western firms is, I think, eminently well documented. It's evidence in the fact that they don't buy anything abroad unless they absolutely have to. And I think semiconductor companies are all worried that their market share is going to decline over time. And I think they all realize that the more chip making tools that are sold to China accelerates that process.
Just remind everybody sort of in the chip ecosystem, in the world of chip ecosystems, where Broadcom plays.
Broadcom's one of the biggest designers of semiconductors. They don't manufacture, but they do the design process. And they've been focusing in particular on designing AI chips for other companies. Some of the big hyperscalers that are investing in their own chip designs, those are often done in partnership today with Broadcom.
Looking across the ecosystem, who does Broadcom have to be most worried about? Because we got that report from the information about Apple working with Broadcom. These two companies have sort of done this dance of scorpions where they sting each other, but also then, well, he was saying it was like, what, mating scorpions? Is that right?
Yeah, it's like
Ian King's words,
it's like
not
two
mine.
Scorpions mating.
Yeah, we're there,
It's not easy. That's a little complicated.
I won't describe it, but let's just use the term frenemies instead.
It's perfect.
I think that's That's a great analogy. Broadcom produces a really wide range of products, and so they simultaneously cooperate and compete with a bunch of different companies in the technology space. I think if you focus on the AI portion of their portfolio, in some ways they're competing with NVIDIA, because a lot of the in-house designed processors that the hyperscalers are designing right now are intended to be replacements for NVIDIA's products, at least to a certain degree. And so I think investors are going to look at this result and ask, what does this mean for the process of bringing more chip design in-house at some of the big hyperscalers?
Hey, Chris, gonna have to leave it there. Always love it when you take the time to join us. Do appreciate that very much. Chris Miller, Associate Professor of International History at Tufts University. He's the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Chip War, The Fight for the World's Most Critical Technology.
This is the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Well, the U.S., in case you hadn't noticed, is experiencing a surge in power demand, with electricity consumption expected to climb almost 16% over the next 5 years. Why, you may ask?
A few factors.
Right?
Is it because we're all getting EVs? I don't think so. Could have something to do with it. A few factors and drivers of that demand, including data centers, EVs, AI. Welcome, everybody, to the new economy. With more on what may be the next supply-demand imbalance are two killer members of our Bloomberg News team who reported out this story. They are Bloomberg News Power and Renewable Energy editor Will Wade. Also with Bloomberg News Energy and Climate Disasters reporter Josh Saul, both here in our Bloomberg Business Week studio. Will, I want to start with you and get an idea for consumption and where it exactly is coming from. Is it all AI, or the push to move away from natural gas for heating and cooling? Is that part of it? Where is it coming from?
It's all of it, and it's all happening all of a sudden. So we've seen cloud computing. Everyone wants to put all your photos and your files up in the cloud. That's driving data centers, a lot of data centers. And then all of a sudden, the same big tech companies are starting to do AI, and that's an enormous use of power. So we've got data centers and then AI data centers, and then we've got the push to electrify everything. We want to use electric heating in your house instead of gas. We want to use electricity for your cars instead of gasoline. We've got factories that are trying to use electricity for industrial heat instead of gas or coal. So it's just coming from every direction. But the crazy thing is, we didn't really see this coming until about a year ago. So the utilities that build power plants, which takes years, weren't really planning for it that effectively. So now there's a potential looming shortage of electricity.
Which makes me wonder, should we just stop talking about the promise of AI and basically, because we're not going to have enough power to meet the demand, should we just stop it already? Because the expectations, the euphoria, is not going to be able to be met so easily or quickly?
You know what?
Because of the power demands?
I'm not so worried about running out of power, like you turn on the light switch and there's no electricity for the lights. What I'm worried about is people not working for clean energy. So we're going to see electricity from anywhere they can get it. We got people building more gas plants than we've seen in a long time. We got people that promised to shut down coal plants. Now they're going, let's keep those open a little longer.
Yeah.
Josh wrote about the gas plants a lot.
Well, tell us about that, Josh.
Right. So there's a concept I wanted to bring up because I want to get listeners familiar with it, and it's base load power. So the deal with wind and solar power is that it's intermittent, right? It's when the wind is blowing or when the sun is up, and it's very complicated to arrange a grid with a lot of clean energy sources because you have to balance the grid at all times. And when people wake up in the morning, they need the electricity running so they can run their appliances and get ready for their day. And sometimes if the sun isn't up at that point, that makes it tougher. What gas is really good at, a big gas power plant, is that it's base load power. It just produces pretty close to the same amount of power all the time. Gas also produces carbon, which makes it a climate issue, which is what Will's talking about. But we had the CEO of GE Vernova in recently, and he basically says, our wind sales are pretty flat, but our gas business is going bananas because they build the big gas turbines that power plants use to generate the power, and they've increased manufacturing, and they're selling huge amounts of these gas turbines because that's what data centers want. He told us, nobody's planning for anything other than 24/7 power usage.
Is there a way that we can offload, and by we I mean the United States, can offload some of this electricity usage, Josh, outside of the country where electricity is more abundant, in the sense, build some of these server farms in other places where there isn't an issue on the grid?
It's complicated and it's hard to do. I mean, with data centers, it's hard because some things that are operating on the data centers, certainly anything related to national security, and even lots of companies, they want their data in the U.S. Even in, imagine
the nearshoring, onshoring is like certainly something that you see with the data centers. They want it nearby.
Yeah, I mean, imagine a healthcare company. They don't want all their data stored in some country that they don't necessarily trust. So you run into issues with that. And as far as moving other users of power, can't really move homes overseas without moving the family there. Obviously, that's complicated. And then a big factory, we want the big factory here because we want the jobs and we want the stuff produced here. So those power demands are also onshore.
There's so many things that are coming to mind. Remind us, guys, about the rules and regulations that are in place in terms of carbon emissions, that the kind of commitments that companies and individuals or institutions have to abide by under the current administration or under the current rules, and how a new administration might change some of that.
Okay, well, when Biden came into office, he said he wanted to have a 100% clean power grid by 2035, and they set a 2050 net zero target. But these aren't really binding. These were goals, and I'm seeing an increasing pessimism about reaching those goals.
And they don't even seem very close in the sense of years. Like, those are pretty far off.
Anyway, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and we had so many companies, especially in like maybe the last 5 years, come out with their own internal net zero goals. And a lot of them were like really impressive and really ambitious. We're going to, utilities that promised to stop burning coal, big tech companies that said all of our operations are going to be carbon free.
Yeah, that was before ChatGPT.
That's the problem. So these things were not binding, and now we're seeing a lot of companies kind of going radio silent on their goals, or some of them are just straight out saying, we're not going to make that.
Does it matter if it's a global company? In other words, because it's got to deal by global rules and global regulations, or no? Not necessarily, in terms of hitting carbon emissions, reductions.
The utilities, so the power companies actually producing
Here.
the power, they're here, so their goals are here. We're already seeing those get kind of a little eroded around the edges. Companies saying, well, we said we're going to be done with coal by 2030. We're actually going to be running these coal plants a little longer, but we're still sticking to our 2050 net zero goal. We're kind of seeing those eroded a little bit. But the way one energy analyst put it to me recently is he said, I mean, unless a company's goals are tied to some kind of state law, they're not really worth the paper they're written on, because they'll just keep getting eroded, and then as it gets closer to 2050, they'll get maybe completely tossed out the window.
Hey, Will, what about nuclear? Where does nuclear come into this?
Which is something like, I feel like in the last 2 years, we all of a sudden hear everybody talking about nuclear energy.
Yeah, but I mean, you've spent a lot of time visiting nuclear facilities. Not so easy to just put a shovel in the ground and build one.
No, nuclear is great. I mean, Josh was talking about baseload power. You know what's even better for baseload? Nuclear. It runs like 97, 98, 99% of the time over the course of a year. You know what's not great about nuclear? It takes years to build. So we've got all of these companies, seriously, in like the last couple of months, a lot of the big tech companies have announced these really big deals to use nuclear power to power their data centers in 2030 something when they're built, because there aren't any extra nuclear power plants laying around, and it's going to take years to build them. And they're working with companies that are developing new technologies, so they hope they'll be ready in the next 5 years, but it's, there's always the chance they can get delayed. So in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of gas.
It's kind of ironic, right? The move to clean energy is kind of complicating this process, right? In terms of wanting, as you said, the electrification of so much, that it's making it difficult to kind of hit these targets. And I'm looking at, a headline from today, California reeling from extreme weather as the wildfire risks return. And they also talk about another atmospheric river up in Northern California. I mean, as we are talking about this, we continue to see it firsthand and increasingly the impact of climate change. So I just wonder kind of where this all leads us.
Yeah, that's the right question. And the answer is we don't know. We are seeing climate disasters in real time. In the summer, it's too hot. Now in the fall and the winter, we're getting too much rain.
And wildfires like in New York City, which are like unheard of.
Yeah, make for great sunsets, but it smells bad. And we're seeing the climate really has been affected. And that's the right question to ask because, all these factories are trying to decarbonize, but then where do you get the electricity? The people to point out, you think you're so green because you've got an EV, but you're powering it with coal power. So there's a lot that has to happen. It's not an easy switch.
Well, Josh, this is your beat. I mean, you're energy and climate disasters reporter. So what is the fundamental connection between these two things?
I see it that, of course, the factories that produce the things we need for clean energy require power, but anything that we produce requires power. So I think overall that transition is still good for decarbonization, is still good for putting less carbon into the atmosphere and hopefully at least not accelerating those kinds of wildfires and those other things we're talking about. And I think that's more important.
Okay, so Will, come on in here because you mentioned the grid. And this is something that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, the health of the grid. And it's sort of this patchwork, at least here in the United States, where, you have, Texas always comes to mind, for example, given the freeze that they saw a few years ago and the failure of the grid. Where does the stability of the grid come into the conversation?
That's another huge issue. Lots of the grid is not so stable. A lot of the wires have been standing there for years, and when a hurricane comes through, they get knocked down. The utilities say they want to underground the wires because it's more reliable, which is a great idea, but expensive. You use the word patchwork. I think that's a pretty good word, especially because it's multiple systems operated by so many different companies in so many different jurisdictions with different rules. It's complicated.
Well, we know it's not easy. Josh, I also do wonder, is there something else within the alt energy space or new energy space that we're not talking about? My husband constantly is like, what about hydrogen fuel cells? That makes sense to me. I'm just curious, is there something that, I don't know whether it's in the next year or next 6 months or next 2 years that we start talking about that might help this situation?
I think a lot of those things, fusion, hydrogen, a lot of those things are pretty far off. I think right now it kind of is just back to the basics. That wind and solar takes some pressure off the grid.
Yeah.
And but right now it just looks like the next year looks like just more gas.
That was Bloomberg News power and renewable energy editor Will Wade, along with Bloomberg News energy and climate disasters reporter Josh Saul.
Tim, I think about, after 2 years of doing nothing but AI investing and focusing on NVIDIA and everybody spending and so on and so forth and doing kind of their build out, all of a sudden it's like breaks on because people are saying, wait a minute, we got to have the power to fuel all of the AI computations that are necessary.
I thought a lot about this when I was out for the holiday break because I was on the central coast of California and Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant is right on the central coast where I was. And we actually went to the beach right where the nuclear power plant is. I thought to myself, incredible to see the attention on this facility as a result of power demand. And this power plant on the central coast of California was set to be shut down.
Right.
And Governor Gavin Newsom extended it as a result of power demand.
Get ready, folks, for a lot more on this front come 2025. Still ahead on Bloomberg Business Week, our Bloomberg intelligence team has done the research, the work, and they have the 50 companies to keep your eye on this year.
Hey, they did the work, but we get to share the findings. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Artificial intelligence was, no doubt about it, a big factor to watch for in the 2024 year ahead issue of the Bloomberg Business Week 50 companies to watch. That was 1 year ago. We know how the AI revolution played out this past year, continued to play out. For the companies and trends to keep an eye on for 2025, we turn to the annual list we love to highlight.
The list comes courtesy of Bloomberg Intelligence and its analysts who track some 2,000 companies in sectors ranging from finance to food, who have once again come out with its annual list of companies that warrant a closer look, which you can read now on the Bloomberg Terminal and at Bloomberg.com/Businessweek, as well as the January issue of Bloomberg Businessweek magazine.
To help break down some of the top names to watch, we spoke with Bloomberg Intelligence Senior European Strategist and Director of Research Content, Tim Craighead.
The 50 companies to watch are based largely off of a group of companies that we have as focus ideas. And our focus ideas are where our analysts around the globe, on a bottom-up basis, sector by sector, are looking for fundamental situations where they have a really strong view, a high conviction view that they think is out of consensus, that's differentiated from what the market is thinking. And we zero in on 50 out of that broader list that have specific catalysts in 2025, in this case, that we think will bring the market around to our point of view. And, it's pretty balanced across sectors. About half are U.S. or Americas oriented. The other 50% are sort of equally split between Europe and Asia. About 20% are negative, about 80% are positive. So there's a good balance around. And, there's lots of different drivers, company by company and sort of theme by theme.
And there are some buckets, Tim, that they fall into, whether it's cyclical recovery, AI related, which tends to hit a lot of companies nowadays. But give us a little bit of context on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because if I actually juxtapose this year versus last, AI was a big deal a year ago, but it was a lot of the big AI companies, the software companies, the LLM guys and whatnot. This year, it's more geared towards the semiconductors and enabling technologies behind it. We can get into some of those. China was a big deal last year, but it was all negative about the property crisis. This year, the list has changed complexion from a China perspective, and it's more positive oriented about a cyclical recovery because of the stimulus that's coming through. And you can also look at other topics such as a broader base cyclical recovery in Europe or the US because of lower interest rates. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of innovation and new product stories in there as well, and some other factors.
All right, we want to get into some of the names. I know it's alphabetical, but we got to get into, first of all, Broadcom. Why are you guys highlighting it?
Yeah, well, Broadcom is interesting because you think of this as a semiconductor company, but it's much more than a semiconductor company because it's gotten into infrastructure software, and it's one of the few companies that combines semiconductors and software. And importantly, it's part of the AI theme because a lot of what it's doing feeds into the whole AI story, whether it's with Google or Meta or what have you. So, it's a pretty intriguing story. And, the software business came from, their acquisition of VMware a couple of years ago.
Why is Tesla on the list this year?
So Tesla is there, and I'm going to bring in one other company at the same time. Okay. This falls into that category of new products, innovation, and whatnot. Obviously, Tesla is all about electric vehicles, but importantly, as we look into next year, there's new vehicles that are coming through, an important refresh of their core cars, and we think that that's an opportunity for a lift. Similarly, Porsche, we all like Porsches. I think we all like Porsches. I'd like to like a Porsche. They've got.
You're speaking.
Well, I'm going to tell you, you can like it. It's just right about ownership, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because back in the day, these were relatively affordable. The way that Porsche has driven its business, pun intended, is to go higher and higher end to where, the average selling price of their cars are quite significant. And essentially what they're trying to do is attain a Ferrari-like profit margin. And they've got a number of products, whether it's hybrid related or other, that should help propel the company along and its profits and its margins along. Interestingly, and it flies a little bit in the face of Tesla. Clearly, that's pure battery electric vehicle. There has certainly been a pause in the U.S. and in Europe about that whole sort of transition to electric vehicles. And Porsche's core combustion engine business is doing better than what a lot of people thought it was going to do.
Tim, I want to stick with the transportation theme here and talk Airbus, because a lot has happened with this duopoly over the last year, including at the beginning of this year, that door panel blowing out on that 737 MAX, that Alaska Airlines jet. And that sort of sent Boeing into its most recent struggles, and new executive there and the like. Why Airbus on the list?
Yeah, so there's a couple of elements that play in. Part of it is just pure cyclical recovery. You know, there is continued recovery in air traffic. There's continued recovery in order flow for airlines. And at the same time, there's been a real constraint on supply, on the supply channel going into the airline or airframe business. We think both of these elements are in play for 2025, and to the degree that Airbus, we think, continues to gain relative market share versus Boeing, you know, there's a host of factors that play into a pretty positive view here.
All right, I like planes too, but I also like makeup. I'm just going to put it out there.
I thought you were going to say trains.
That would have been.
There is a train company on the list.
Darn you.
A railroad on the list.
All
Just
right.
a deep tease.
All right. We're going to get back to that in a moment.
Okay.
Estee Lauder, I want to bring that one. It's been under pressure. It's a well-known company, iconic company in the cosmetic business. If you go back to Estee Lauder, who created it, it has gone through some changes. It's down, I think, more than 40% this year, but it's been on quite a rally since kind of mid-November, up about 30%. You guys highlighted it. Are you expecting some kind of not liquidation, but some kind of, I don't know, event that maybe changes the fortunes going forward?
Yeah, well, so Estee Lauder is an interesting one because you have to love the brands that make up Estee Lauder. You know, whether it's Estee Lauder itself or MAC or Clinique, what have you. But it really does seem like they've lost a bit of an edge in some of their brands. They're also particularly skewed towards airport travel-related retail, which continues to be under pressure, notwithstanding air travel coming back. Spending on duty-free has continued to remain a pressure point. We think Estee Lauder continues to have some potential for disappointment in the first half of the year before maybe things then come around. They've announced a big restructuring that will happen. We think actually that restructuring charge that they'll take could actually be even more with a new CEO who's come in place. So stay tuned. By the end of next year, there could be an interesting recovery, but it's a rough road in between now and then.
All right, I'm getting back to transit and logistics.
I was going to say planes, makeup, and trains.
Yeah, planes, makeup, and trains. Doesn't have the same ring to it as the John Candy film. Norfolk Southern. What's going on with Norfolk Southern?
So it's an interesting story. I have a long-standing association with Norfolk Southern, previously Norfolk and Western. My dad worked there for over 40 years, God rest his soul. And they've had issues over the last couple of years, unlike Union Pacific, which actually was on our list last year, that had really gotten moving with precision rail, to be very precise in the logistics, and it's really good for customers and it's great for their margins and efficiency. Norfolk Southern had been lagging. They have a new CEO who's in. They're bringing management in who's much more geared towards this precision transportation. We think this is a recovery story in 2025, somewhat akin to what we had seen at UNP last year.
You said 20% negative, 80% positive stories. Is it always that mix, or does it tell you anything about kind of sentiment or what's going on in the market?
No, we try to have a balance of the standard view is looking at glass half full, but we try to keep an eye out towards where do we see expectations that have run too far, too fast. And, our ideas range from a couple of banks to some consumer product companies to some tech companies. Yes.
That's Tim Craighead, Senior European Strategist and Director of Research Content for Bloomberg Intelligence. Check out the full list online at Bloomberg.com/businessweek and on the Bloomberg terminal.
And we should point out, one other company we talked about with Tim Craighead that was in that interview was Broadcom. Broadcom's last earnings report, which came out after the publishing of Businessweek's 50 Companies to Watch, really supported why this company made the list in the first place. Broadcom's 2024 revenue in the last quarter, Tim, increased 44% year over year to a record $51.6 billion, and largely due to a strong demand for AI chips. And then the stock soared to a $1 trillion market valuation on the news. Its share price more than doubling this past year. It is now, I believe, Tim, because these things move around a little bit, the second most valuable chip company behind NVIDIA.
Look, this is why you should pay attention to what Bloomberg Intelligence and Tim Craighead and the team write. Here's what they wrote about Broadcom. Ahead of those numbers, they write that it provides a unique combination of advanced semiconductors and infrastructure software, and it's positioned this year for accelerated growth. It's among the leading suppliers of semiconductors used in advanced networks that connect AI computers and data centers, and it has a growing business selling custom AI chips to, yes, Google and Meta platforms.
I love that. So spot on, right? And again, that was ahead of Broadcom's earnings, which showed that momentum. Hey, another company that Tim mentioned, you just heard about it, though, was Tesla. But Tesla also came out with some news after we talked with Tim. Tesla's annual vehicle sales dropping for the first time in more than a decade, despite a year-end push that sent deliveries to a record in the fourth quarter. And we did see Tesla shares dropping specifically on that news. All right, that wraps up our first hour of the weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week from Bloomberg Radio. Coming up in our next hour, a former healthcare CEO on the importance of paying workers a living wage and why he says that is good for business.
Plus, Blue Sky versus X. Okay. Elon versus Altman. Sure. And Paddington Bear versus Dogman.
What?
I don't know what's going on here, but we're going to break down the feuds that are going to define 2025.
Something, it sounds like, that Max Chafkin would talk about. So he's coming up in the next hour.
Man.
Totally. Plus, travel was back in a big way in 2024. You know that. So have we all hit the hot spots? Nope. Says our Bloomberg Pursuits team. We have the best cities, resorts, restaurants, and museums to visit in the year ahead, courtesy of our Pursuits team. And even better, we've compiled the costs of each and every trip. All you need to do is pack your bags.
This is the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plenty ahead in our second hour of our first weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week of 2025. We continue our look ahead, including the feuds that will define the new year. Some beefs we knew, others we probably don't see coming.
Plus, our Bloomberg Pursuits team, in collaboration with Kayak, out with a list of the best places worth checking out this year. This time, they've got an interactive breakdown of the costs at your fingertips. You are not going to believe
so cool.
This tool tells you when to go, how much it's going to cost you. And even though it's in Pursuits, Carol, there are some affordable destinations.
Yeah, and some of them don't require a passport. That's all I'm going to put it out there.
Some of them.
Some of them. First up this hour, it's something we talk a lot about here on Business Week, and that is the gap between how much executives make versus those on the front lines. Check this out. According to the Economic Policy Institute, CEO compensation rose by 1,085% between 1978 and 2023, while the typical worker's compensation only rose 24%. The Economic Policy Institute also notes that in 2023, CEOs made 290 times as much as the typical worker, compared to 21 times as much back in 1965. Times have changed, Tim.
This may be a surprise to you, but not to our next guest, who says we need to, quote, pay the people. John Driscoll is the former CEO of CareCentrix. It was bought by Walgreens Boots Alliance more than 2 years ago. He currently chairs Magnet Global, an international staffing company that manages over 700,000 employees.
John is also author of the book, Pay the People, Why Fair Pay is Good for Business and Great for America.
I'm really focusing on making the case that it's good for business and it's good for America if we can get to a living wage. You know, we lost the string a while ago between the 1930s and 1980. Median productivity in the United States went up by about 97%, and the median wages went up by about 90%. Since 1980 to today, productivity's gone up another 90%, but median wages have only gone up by 9%.
That's a gap.
It's inconceivable that we should sort of push working class folks farther and farther away from being able to take part in this great capitalist adventure that's working for so many of us. But there's 40 million people in America who aren't earning a living wage.
Do you think the incentives are misaligned? Because if we think about, and you've been part of publicly traded companies before, what do investors care about? They care about the top line, and they care about the bottom line.
We never talk about, okay, so they'll, what
how
wages,
much?
Yeah, how much did, the people on the front lines make?
You know what they care? They care about automation and increasing margins.
Yeah.
But I think, though, that you're starting to see things change. At my own
we
company,
thought this 2018 with the Economic Roundtable. And it's only gotten worse.
I think that first of all, the trend's been horrible for the last 30 years, as I just pointed out. But at my own company, when we froze executive salaries and doubled minimum wage 12 years ago, retention went up, engagement went up, but productivity also went up by about 30%. And you're starting to see some of the most successful companies in America, Bank of America, JP Morgan, also raise their wages to a living wage. They did it as part of that business roundtable commitment, but what they found is that it lowered the number of people who were leaving their jobs, because people who are working in minimum wage jobs are often working 2 jobs. They're not as engaged. They found that productivity went up. What they invested in kind of if you want a fairer social contract, they found they had a more successful and profitable business. I think the most important thing is we get the story out that it is a productivity gain and a win for the companies, and also that I don't think that capitalism can easily be sustained if the bottom third of the workforce isn't really part of if the company wins, you win.
So why don't we do it then? Like, you lay out a really good premise, an argument. Why isn't it that more companies don't do that?
Well, that's what I am focused right now, Carol, on selling that story and telling that story. Because even for the executives that have done it, they are surprised at how it increases how long folks stay at jobs. It increases their productivity. But that's not a story that many people have told, and they certainly haven't told it with very specific examples. Our ability to pay claims grew by 30%. People stayed at our company for longer. We had fewer people quietly quitting or quitting very quickly. And so I think it's selling and telling that story. I also think that we're getting the message in a lot of different ways. I think the reason why we have so much rancor, anger, and discontentment in working class voters of all races and backgrounds is they're not really feeling like they're part of business, of an America that works, where business is clearly working and being successful.
Because, John, one of the things Tim and I have talked about a lot, and you write about the Restaurant Association and the restaurant industry, that I feel like, first of all, we feel like there's a tip jar everywhere. And to me, it just says we're not paying workers enough.
Correct.
And why aren't companies paying workers? Why do I would rather pay more for an item and just ensure that these workers are getting paid. I think about the restaurant industry that, right, they expect that they're going to be tips. Like, how do we kind of rework that?
Well, I think we have to actually tell the story, sell the story, and then organize. But there are plenty of examples. Danny Meyer has been a leader in and a supporter of the movement that we're working on, which is to eliminate kind of the tipped minimum wage,
right,
which is still at $3.25.
It's unbelievable.
And you start thinking of we're not talking about Danielle. We're talking about most people are working at Denny's. And when you increase the minimum wage and you get to a fair wage, California raised the fast food minimum wage to $20 an hour. I thought it was an odd thing to do, but there was a lot of complaints that would harm the industry. There's thousands more fast food jobs now.
Why did you think it was an odd thing to do?
Well, I think it was odd to just bring it up for one category.
Right.
For me, the most important thing is to eliminate tip minimum wage across the board and get to a living wage. Again, you've got 40 million people where they're working full-time jobs and one job doesn't afford them enough to live independently and pay their bills.
What do you think of the most wealthy people in the world right now? Someone like Elon Musk, for example, whose fortune has increased by roughly $200 billion just since the election. What do you make of the concentration of wealth at the very top?
Well, I think one of the things that we actually got me excited about Patriotic Millionaires is that I was deeply offended by the notion of the reduction of taxes on the most wealthy and the reduction of the estate tax, because I think the threat of intergenerational oligarchic wealth of massive scale intentionally or unintentionally distorting the politics of the moment is a real challenge. And that was 20 years ago when I started working with Patriotic Millionaires. But I don't think the biggest problem we have is the massive accumulation at the top, because part of that's related to technology. It's the fact that we cut off the bottom third of workers in America, and that's not going to be good for the economy. If more and more people feel like they're not part of the American dream, we're the only country that dream is associated with the country. Our country is held together by this notion that we're in it together. If the bottom third of America does, from a wages and wealth perspective, doesn't feel like they're part of it, I worry about democracy. I think there are plenty of things you could do in tax policy to certainly make sure that, as Warren Buffett says, he isn't paying a lower percentage of taxes than his assistant. I think we should have a fair inheritance tax so we don't have these massive concentrations of wealth. But the urgent problem of today is to pay people who are working hard, leaning in, people who are at the bottom third of the wage scale, who are really, running up a down escalator of costs, particularly at a time of inflation.
So how do we get executives to start thinking about it? We have many conversations with CEOs, and we often do hear about having to pay up for talent, but I'm assuming they mean executives and folks kind of higher up in their company, and not necessarily everyone. How do we get them to think about that all across all of the workers that they pay for?
I don't know how we convince them, but the voters are already there. Raising the minimum wage to a higher level has won in almost, I think it's 19 out of 20 states. It's been put on the ballot. In the last election cycle, raising the minimum wage won by 6 points in Missouri. It won easily in Alaska. Those are both Trump plus 10 or 20 states. And the Republican attempt to reduce the raising the tip minimum wage actually was defeated at the ballot box in Arizona. So the voters are already there. I think the only way we're going to get there today is politically, because if you have to convince one executive at a time, we'll be here forever.
So through voters?
We have to put it on the ballot. We have to get it through Congress. And I think what's remarkable to me is the Republican voters are already there.
Is it a zero-sum game? Like, is it, if to pay workers more, do executives have to earn less?
Not at all. I mean, the most recent example of raising fast food minimum wage and creating more fast food jobs is the example of the last couple of years. But when the Restaurant Association, as we talk about in the book, actually polled its members, not its lobbyists in D.C., they found that many of them actually wanted to increase those wages. There's a Nobel Prize-winning economist who studied what happened when New York raised its wages in hospitality and Pennsylvania didn't. And what they found is that the New York businesses actually grew faster, which means those business owners made more money even though the wages that they had to pay were higher.
Well, do you think raising minimum wage in one sector like restaurants does raise minimum wage across other sectors too? You don't think so? So you don't think, like, if you're getting paid $20 an hour to work at McDonald's, then the warehouse owner has to raise their wages to that, or else their employees are going to go work at McDonald's instead?
I mean, is the burger going to go up, or the fries going to go up?
Well, the reality is the percentage of labor that goes into the Big Mac is actually pretty trivial. It would probably, to pay a living wage at McDonald's, it would probably go up by 4 to 5 cents per burger. So I think it's
not much.
It's de minimis.
I'm playing a little bit devil's advocate here.
No, absolutely. And where I was going with is we're moving too slowly. It's time to actually change the laws, change the rules, and make sure that everybody at the bottom end of the pay scale is paid a living wage. And that's true for folks. We've got to eliminate the tip minimum wage. I would eliminate the discount for disabled workers. We have to get to the point where all executives who believe in the dignity of work start paying wages that are equivalent to dignified pay.
We have this terminal function on the Bloomberg terminal where we can look up executive compensation. So forgive me for being fresh, but you are part of a group that does argue that many people should be getting paid more and executives sometimes should be getting paid less. In 2023, your total compensation was over $11 million. Was that too much? Were you paid too much?
I have been the beneficiary of a capitalist system that overpays the top and isn't paying enough at the bottom. But I am absolutely certain, we could get get to a living wage level, and it would make no big dent on the comp at the top. But let me also say that as a patriotic millionaire, I am on the record as saying I think we should increase taxes on people like me and increase the estate tax for all of us.
How high should they be? Because if you go back in history, I mean, the top marginal tax rate would shock, 50, 60 years ago, would shock people today.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like
insanely high.
Yeah. It was insanely high.
Let's start by not extending the tax cuts that Trump put in place when he was in office. Let's start by getting to a level that we were paying during the Clinton administration, which was one of the greatest periods of prosperity, and we were actually paying down the debt. We have a $1.7 trillion deficit this year. It is not going to be news to anyone who can do math that all of us are going to be paying taxes. And I think it should be very clear that people like me should be paying more taxes than most.
Yeah, but we've been hearing this for a couple of years. I mean, I remember being out at Milken a few years ago and people saying, yep, it's time for us to pay more taxes, really wealthy individuals. And yet here we are. One thing I want to ask you, because we're running out of time, is that if we believe in a free market, I'm looking at your book about some of the myths that are out there, that if we pay people a living wage, some of the myths that you kind of address. And one is, this isn't an issue for the government because the free market will naturally take care of it. We saw wages go up during the pandemic and out of it because there was a shortage of workers. And so supply, demand, free market, it was at work. But I don't know that will continue. Will the free market kind of help bring this about?
Well, I think if you look at where wages are right now, even during the pandemic, while there was a slight bump in wages at the bottom, costs went up at twice the rate that wages went up.
Right.
And so, no, the free market has failed. And by the way, it worked when we actually had a minimum wage that was closer to reflecting a living wage, which drove the greatest period of economic success the world has ever seen between the 40s and the 80s. We unhooked the bottom third of the workforce at that point, and I think we've got a pretty angry, unhappy electorate and a lot of people living in near poverty, and that's just not fair.
We just had a conversation with, what was it, the CEO of Feeding America?
Feeding America, yeah.
And just talked about, the people who just don't have enough food on their table.
Yeah, food insecurity in this country.
Food insecurity.
It's mind-boggling.
Just incredible, the percentages. And so
one out of 3 or 4 kids, 1 out of 5 households. That is unacceptable. And by the way, paying a living wage is not going to cost capitalism. It's actually going to improve our markets and business environment.
30 seconds. Is a living wage the same in every state, in every city? It's got to be depending on the locale.
No, I think that the feds should set a living wage at the national median.
Okay.
And then you can vary it up or down based on what the true cost. The costs in LA and New York are very different than the costs in Jackson, Mississippi, or West Texas. You have to vary it. But the minimum is so low right now as to be insulting to workers.
I feel like you're preaching to the choir. John Driscoll, come back soon. This was an important conversation. Of course, former CEO of CareCentric, his new book, Pay the People, Why Fair Pay is Good for Business and Great for America.
This is the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
In one corner, we have the world's richest man, electric car and rocket titan, and self-proclaimed first buddy of Donald Trump. In the other corner, OpenAI's chief executive officer, whom Elon Musk has accused in a lawsuit of hijacking the venture in pursuit of profit. This feud, as you now know, is between Elon and Sam Altman.
That's just one of the many feuds that Bloomberg Businessweek columnist Max Chafkin writes about in the year-ahead issue of Bloomberg Businessweek. Max is also co-host of the Elon Inc. podcast and the author of the book, The Contrarian, Peter Thiel and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power. Max breaks down the characters for the top feuds in 2025 with Carol and Bloomberg's Emily Graffeo.
Well, Businessweek is forecasting all the trends we anticipate in 2025, markets and so on that'll be up and what'll be down. But of course, feuds, who's going to be fighting with who is always a fun question. And I think, during the the soon-to-be Trump presidency, we'll probably be seeing more of those, right? This is a president-elect who loves a good, public brouhaha, and we've got quite a few characters, who are connected to the administration, who are in the middle of fights of their own.
And it sounds like Elon pops into a couple of these feuds, which is no surprise since he kind of is popping up everywhere.
Yeah, he feuds with a lot of folks. The one we picked on to focus on is Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, which is basically the market leading artificial intelligence chatbot platform. Elon Musk has been beefing with Sam Altman for years, dating all the way back to the founding of this company. To give you the sort of quick version of it, basically, it was started as a nonprofit and has kind of morphed into something else. Elon Musk is not happy about that. Partly, he says, just because of the principle, but also, oh, by the way, he happens to own a significant competitor to OpenAI. So there's sort of a business dispute and an ethical dispute, and of course, a potential regulatory dispute, because the Trump administration, the next Trump administration, will be seeking to change the AI regulatory framework, and Elon Musk could have a voice there.
You left out the good part, what Elon has called Sam.
Right, yes. Elon has adopted the Trump thing of giving everyone nicknames. So he called Sam Altman Swindly Sam. Given how much Elon Musk tweets and also the kind of merging between Elon Musk and Trump, I think that would be another thing to look out for, other nicknames, other people who might earn an epithet.
Okay, so I want to get to the other feuds, but weren't Sam Altman and Elon Musk, didn't they initially work together? Like they were first going to be business partners, and now this has fallen into such a feud.
They were co-founders of OpenAI.
Right.
And that's kind of the source of this, because Elon Musk gave a bunch of money to start this thing up. I think at the time he saw it as a philanthropic donation. And over the years, it's become clear that OpenAI, whatever its philanthropic mission, which has to do with, keeping the world safe from AI apocalypse, is going to be a potential threat to some of Elon Musk's companies. Tesla, of course, is embarking on this pivot to AI. Musk has also launched this competing AI chatbot through XAI, which is kind of vaguely related to X, which, formerly known as Twitter. So they've basically gone from being partners, to being frenemies, maybe.
Maybe he's just cranky because we're going to start, not talking about tweets anymore, but talking about skeets. And this gets to another feud that you guys write about, that you include in your list.
This is interesting. Blue Sky, which is one of the competitors to Twitter, over the last couple of years, we've seen a bunch of these come and go. Remember, there was the Facebook version, Threads. There was something called Mastodon. There are also the conservative Twitter alternatives, Parler, and of course, the president-elect's own company, Truth Social. Blue Sky is really the first one to take off in a big way that feels organic. Threads had a lot of users, but they were all kind of coming from Instagram. Essentially, users were being just sort of put there, whether they liked it or not. What we've seen with Blue Sky over the past few months, as the service has gotten sort of more fully featured, and as users, perhaps because they're turned off by the owner of X, Elon Musk's support of President-elect Donald Trump, or perhaps it's just because under Elon Musk, X has changed. We're seeing huge explosions of growth, especially in some of those cohorts of user that had really made Twitter, now X, vibrant. So talking about sort of media figures, celebrities, even some politicians, even some sports folks. It's really, it feels real. I mean, it's much smaller than any of the other social networks at the moment, but it does feel like, it is a potential threat. And of course, on Twitter, you've got tweets, even though it's called X, we still call them tweets for some reason. And on Blue Sky, they are called, whether you like it or not, skeets.
I want to do kind of a Twitter or X poll, because just in our informal control room, I'm getting all these things in our IB chat. Skeets really kind of sounds a little risque.
Listen, I don't make the terms. I just report on them.
But so does X. I mean, I have to say, I still type in Twitter blue.com.
I do too.
Into my browser, and then it like populates to X, but I'm not typing in x.com.
I know. But I'm slowly using X more than I'm using Twitter. Like I find myself
or Blue
going
Sky
there.
more than Twitter.
No, I mean just saying X.
Oh, saying X, yeah.
No, but I feel like I'm getting solicited a lot about Blue Sky.
Even Elon Musk sometimes still calls it Twitter. We've joked on the Eloning podcast that we should call tweets X's instead of tweets, but it has yet to take off.
Okay, so staying with kind of the tech realm, you also write about a fight against the DOJ and its antitrust head or new head, Gail Slater, versus Google and Google Chrome.
Yeah, so this is in certain ways a continuation of a feud that was kind of heating up during the Biden administration. You've had the Department of Justice take on a bunch of big tech companies, including Google and Apple, trying right now or asking a court to potentially even break up Google. When he announced his new head of the Department of Justice's antitrust division, Gail Slater, Trump, adopted a pretty standoffish tone, talked about sort of big tech having run wild, basically leaving little doubt that this is not going to go away. The DOJ and the DOJ's antitrust division under the sort of Trump leadership is probably not going to just completely back off these tech companies. Now, we'll see what happens with the FTC. Trump has nominated someone there. And there, too, there is a suggestion that at least in tech, the Trump administration doesn't want to sort of go easy, doesn't want to adopt a pose that's like completely friendly to industry. So this fight we've seen brewing for years looks safe to continue. I
feel like we're covering the really important ones, and that has to do with Dogman and Paddington Bear, and also Kendrick Lamar and Drake.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Dogman Paddington dispute is the one that everyone on Wall Street will be watching come January and February.
Get the live blog ready.
When the movies come out. I mean, again, these are two children's movies. One a continuation of the Paddington franchise, one the beginning, the first Dogman film, and you couldn't have two more different superheroes. One is very well spoken and well dressed. The other is nonverbal and drinks out of a toilet. So my children are excited about it, and of course, there is a potential business story here. Both of these could be pretty big movies, and so not a direct feud, but a feud for mindshare.
Okay, and then Kendrick Lamar and Drake, I thought that feud was a 2024 thing. What's happening next year?
So the feud in 2024 was sort of playing out on Spotify and on YouTube, and it was kind of an artistic feud, a rap battle or a series of rap battles. What we have now is a potential for a courtroom feud, which is maybe not as fun as the rap version, but Drake filing in a court, basically announcing his intention to go after both Spotify and UMG, the record label. And the idea here is that UMG was improperly promoting Kendrick's side of the feud. It's a potential racketeering thing. I don't know how realistic this is from a legal perspective and how likely courts are going to be to go along with this. But just to say that this dispute is not going anywhere.
All right. It is the Fed meeting this week. We get our last Fed decision of 2024. So we kind of saved the very timely feud that could happen in 2025. And that, of course, is between the president-elect and Jay Powell, Fed chair. That's on your list.
Yeah, just kind of a long simmering feud that we saw play out during the last Trump presidency. Trump campaigned on having really low interest rates. You wouldn't believe how low these interest rates are going to be. And Powell, meanwhile, has basically been signaling that whatever interest rate cuts are going to happen, the Fed still thinks there's inflation, it seems almost inevitable that there's going to be at least continued tension, if not something hotter.
Can I just ask you, did you leave a lot on the cutting table? Like, were there feuds where people were like...
we are watching many other feuds, and I'll just throw a few others out. You've got Zyn, the tobacco pouch, versus Alp, Tucker Carlson's anti-woke pouches. You've got, of course, sports betting against sports watching, Crocs against Birkenstocks, Love is Blind cast members against Love is Blind producers. I could keep going, but as I said, it's going to be a feud-filled 2025.
Hey, listen, before you go, I can feel it already in the air. Having said that, before we go, the current Elon Inc. podcast is out. Emily mentioned it in the introduction. Mr. Musk goes to Washington and to Paris and to Mar-a-Lago. It's so funny. Was it a football game over the weekend? And there was a picture of Elon and his pick for defense secretary. And then there was, I think, Elon, and it almost looked like his head was pasted in. It almost didn't look real, but I believe he was there.
Yeah, he was there, and he has been basically going most of the places that Trump goes. And, for a month or two, we've been sort of speculating on, can these two guys with these huge egos hang out with each other? Can they stand being not the biggest fish in the room? And it seems like the answer is yes. Elon Musk, so far anyway, has been able to hang with Trump and play second fiddle, and Trump has been able to put up with what amounts to a new house guest or a new guest who's just sort of always hanging around, and who's offering support, cheerleading, and I suppose some policy ideas.
All right, interesting stuff. Great list, made for a fun read and a fun discussion. Max, so appreciate it. Max Chafkin, columnist at Bloomberg Businessweek, co-host of the Elon Inc. podcast. Catch it wherever you find your podcast. You can also find it at Bloomberg.com. And as we mentioned, Max is the author of The Contrarian, Peter Thiel, and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power.
This is the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We wrap up our year ahead look with something that garnered a lot of attention last year: travel and tourism. Interest in globetrotting is at an all-time high, but so is over-tourism. There have been local protests in Barcelona, Venice, and Mallorca, Spain, while Sicily is facing a tourism-induced water crisis. It's not only where one can go, but really where one should go.
We'll get into where you should go in just a bit, but first, before booking any trip, the first thing worth looking at, I think, for a lot of people, is how much is it going to cost? Kayak is one company that has all that data at its fingertips. For more, we were joined by the CEO of Kayak, Steve Hafner.
For 2025, search interest on Kayak is about equal with 2024, which is a relieving thing for everyone in the industry, because 2024 was a really great year in the travel business. And going into the back half of this year, a lot of people were nervous about what 2025 would look like. But so far, travel demand has held firm. Airfares are down a little bit, so prices a little bit down, and that's helping to prop up demand. But the overall headline is it's good news. Two other trends underneath that. The first is just business class or premium seats are up 19% year over year, which tells you that consumers are willing to pay up. And then in terms of where people are going, Asia is on sale and it's on fire. 3 of the top 10 destinations on Kayak right now are in Asia.
Where specifically? Is Japan still pretty hot?
It's Japan. So Carol, you got it. Japan is on sale. So if you look at exchange rates, I'm kind of an exchange rate junkie. There's 154 yen to the US dollar right now. 2 years ago, 105. So basically everything's 35% off, including airfares. So, if you look at travel intent, Sapporo is up 31% on Kayak in terms of query volume. Osaka, 12%. And it's not just the exchange rate, it's social media. So if you're on TikTok or Instagram, which I admittedly am not, you cannot escape seeing a great video of someone enjoying themselves in Japan, and that's driving a lot of consumer interest to go there.
Hey, I am curious how deep you dig, Steve, into your demographic data, because you mentioned that really strong in terms of travel trends, and you say business class tickets, premium class tickets that people are paying up for. Is it because they're getting a deal or because they're paying up for it? So I'm just trying to get an idea. Is it the really wealthy that are traveling and it's not across the board?
No, I think people are just splurging more on experiences. We do see a little bit of a difference between millennials and Gen Z versus older generations in terms of how they travel. So millennials and Gen Z, they're much more likely to have flexibility in their travel planning, and they're willing to use tools like Kayak Explore, which lets you set a budget and find travel dates and save money on airfare that way and reinvest that into the actual in-market experience. Whereas older generations like me who have families, we have fixed travel dates. We want to make sure that flying experience is perfect. So that means, hey, we want to know where we're seating. We want to board first. We want extra leg room. We want a good airport experience. That's kind of where that growth is coming from on the premium side.
What about the older generations and just how they use technology to plan their vacations? What are the biggest changes that you're seeing in that?
Well, I think the older generations, by and large, if they're affluent, are still using travel agents. There's still over 20,000 travel agents who do bespoke travel planning for those people. Everyone else has already migrated online, and not just online, but they're starting to migrate towards these AI assistants, which is what everyone in the travel industry now is kind of holding their breath to see how that changes. Because up until now, you'd had to download an app or go to a website like Kayak and do a search yourself. Now to be able to speak to intelligent AI agent and have them do all the work for you is pretty awesome. So, and I think we're a lot closer to that than a lot of people believe.
There was a period, I feel like, where sustainability and thinking about trips and their impact on the environment was appealing, ecotourism. Or you continue to see people book those kinds of trips?
There's a lot more people who say they're impacted by that than what we actually observe on the website and on the app. So we do show people what's an eco-friendly flight, for example, that is a point of a newer airplane, but people don't seem to be willing to pay more for those flights. So they're still mainly driven by the price point of the airfare or the experience. But I think there is a demographic that's very important to them, particularly on hotels. So we do have sustainability badges on hotels that we think do a good job limiting their footprint. And people do seem, where they're going to stay someplace, to change their booking behavior to one that's more sustainable.
Hey, Steve, before we go, Emily kind of nailed it. You're in a boat, aren't you?
Well, I'm on my floating office here in Miami, yeah.
Okay, we're just having some fun with you. That would be my ideal office.
Oh, yes, from absolutely. A boat. And that view.
Yeah, exactly. Steve, be well. Happy New Year and happy holidays. CEO of Kayak, Steve Hafner, joining us there from Miami. I think it's interesting. You hear and still continue to see a lot of people traveling post-pandemic.
The Japan is incredible. I have multiple friends that are going or have gone in the last year.
And you're like, yeah, I know about that exchange rate stuff.
Yeah, I know that.
Just a little bit.
This is the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Okay, so we just learned that Kayak supplied our Pursuits team some 2.5 billion custom pulled data points to help create an immersive feature to calculate the cost for flights and hotels on the 25 best places to check out this year. It's all in the year ahead issue of Bloomberg Businessweek magazine, which you can check out on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com.
It's a record-setting 19 pages in the magazine, with a beautiful immersive feature on Algeria, 2 new hotspots to prioritize in Spain, an unlikely story about a billionaire creating a new system for conservation, and some decadent hotels on the island of Principe, ideas for your next great coolcation, and the next great museums to travel for.
Count me in. Let's go now. All right, Nikki Eckstein is the travel czar for Bloomberg Pursuits, and she first breaks down the partnership with Kayak.
This was a multi-year effort, I kid you not. I've been trying to make this happen for forever. And finally, this year, I convinced Kayak to give us their greatest minds in their data science department, who churned no fewer than 2.5 billion data points.
That's amazing.
All of them are pricing insights on both hotels and flights that allow you to go to our digital interactive, choose your nearest airport, and figure out what it will cost you to visit all 25 of these places every month of the year from your hometown.
Okay, my flight prices are set for New York City.
So you should be able to see both accurate month-by-month estimates on what it will take to fly to any one of our 25 destinations, including suggested layovers in places where that's required, as well as month-by-month hotel pricing estimates for luxury hotels, because we know that's how we roll.
Oh my God, this is so cool.
Thank you, guys.
All right, so we can play around with this. We can figure out what it's going to cost us. Tell us about the list this year, because you are looking at travel all the time. You usually come up with like kind of an annual review, right? Like you do this on a regular basis.
We are tracking hotel hotel openings, restaurant openings, museum openings, cultural events, infrastructure investments. I mean, you name it, we're tracking it year round. And whatever is most inspiring, whatever is most significant, most game-changing is what rises to the top. This year it's 25 places, and it's almost every continent, not Antarctica, but we are really well spread geographically around the world with lots of inspiration no matter where you're from.
Where is a place that you can go on a budget? We're talking Bloomberg Pursuits here, so we're not always watching the wallet.
How adventurous are you?
Says the dad with 2 kids.
All right.
Pretty adventurous.
Well, I've got 2 ideas for you.
All right, let's hear them.
The Colombian Amazon is a place where your money can go very far because there's not a lot out there. But there's a small company called Nomad that's starting to create these community-owned revenue-shared model lodges. The first of 10 is just opening now, it's these beautiful treehouse-style bungalows, really modern construction, super luxe, but at the same time bare bones and immersed in nature. If all of those things can possibly be true at the same time, I promise you they are. And you go, kayaking down tributaries of the Amazon to look for pink dolphins, and you can hang in a hammock to sleep it all off when you're too tired, and it just seems so dreamy. But the prices are very reasonable. It's like less than $300 a night.
Yeah, I'm looking the best time to go, May and June, November and December. December is, of course, going to be pricey, but yeah, $300 for a hotel per night. And the flight price is cheap too, $390 to get there.
I mean, there you have it.
Okay.
That's your budget idea
so cool.
right then and
Very
there.
cool.
And then if you want to go a little bit farther away, may I propose the island of Principe, which we mentioned up top, where people talk about it like Africa's Galapagos, okay? But most people don't even know where it is, right? It's off the western coast of Africa, equatorial, so, a little bit farther north than your average safari. Warm weather, temperate year-round, a lot of marine activity, so like tropical fish, apparently fish that walk on land. What? Like relics of the dinosaur era? This place is absolutely wild. The landscapes you would not believe.
Yeah, we should call Charles Darwin, fish that walk on land.
Right.
January and February,
I was
Carol,
thinking
are
of
the best
Dr.
times to
Seuss,
go.
like how the fish is.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's all of those things.
Very cool. January, February are the times to go. Median price of a hotel, $208. Average flight price, that's the hard part. It's going to be pricey. $1,800.
Depending on where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Depending where you're coming from.
Excuse me, that's from New York.
Yeah, I mean, if you're flying from like Madrid or something, it's going to be a lot cheaper.
Good point. So New York centric.
Love the south of France. You've got something on there.
Yeah.
I don't know. Can we go there cheaply? I'm like looking around. I guess there are times we can go.
Well,
right?
I will tell you, it's going to be a lot more affordable than Saint-Tropez. And the place that we're talking about is Cap Ferret. Mm-hmm. And it is a beautiful kind of, imagine what Montauk would have been like decades ago.
I used to go to Montauk like 25, 30 years ago.
So you can tell me exactly what Cap
Ferret
Ferret is like.
Should have bought a house there,
I
Carol.
should have. It was really sleepy and lovely, and it was so sweet.
So that's exactly what you're going to get in this little.
Where is this?
We're talking about the Bay of Arachnan.
Okay.
I may be pronouncing that completely wrong, and I'm so sorry to the French people who are listening if so. But it's a small community on an inlet with fishermen huts and colorful houses and places where you can eat seafood that's just been plucked out of the sea. Little boutique hotels that are terribly spelled. You'll see in the package we even call them out for their ridiculous stylings of their names. I'm not even going to dare pronounce. And a new company called Iconic House that does really, really cool villa rentals for way less than you would spend in classic Riviera destinations.
They kind of look like they were named by Grimes and Elon Musk, when they named their kids. So
it's like parentheses and accent marks all over the place, which is why I won't try to say what they are called.
Love, love, love. Where else? What was a surprise to you as you were putting this list together that you think might surprise a lot of folks?
A place that might surprise a lot of folks. Well, we've got places on this list that are kind of humble in my mind, like Lexington, Kentucky, which we're calling as kind of the next Nashville. And then we have places that just really kind of elude the common radar, like the Seychelles, which are actually, if you're in the know, a very classic luxury destination where hotels command really high four-figure prices. But there's a spate of new openings there that are drawing kind of new appeal, new flight access, things like that are really kind of putting that on the map for a wider number of travelers than before. Seychelles is super high on my list. And if you look at the pictures in the digital package, you'll know why.
Yeah.
It looks out of this world.
Carol, if you don't want to fly anywhere, you can step out of this building, you can turn right, walk a few blocks north, and you can go to the Upper East Side, which, yes, is on the list here, Nikki.
Call me crazy.
Help us.
You're crazy.
Help.
I know. Well,
30
here's
seconds.
the thing, you guys. The Frick Museum is reopening. The hotel scene is getting a major glow up. The Surrey has just been brought back to life by Corinthia, which is top notch, with an import from Miami called Casa Tua. It's a restaurant that is like the hottest place on earth right now. So dare to correct me, but I'm pretty sure it's right.
And the flights are really cheap from here.
Transportation is a whole $0.
Just gonna say.
I'll fly you there for $100.
Yeah, right.
But
Me and my whole family.
but don't dare add the price of dinner.
Right, there is that. And hotels are not cheap.
No, not around here, but I promise you'll have a great night out.
Where do you want to go in 2025, real quickly?
Ooh, you know what? Strange but true. I really want to go to Rotterdam. New museums that are opening there. Looks just like Amsterdam, but way under the radar. It looks fabulous.
You are fabulous. Nikki Eckstein, Travel Czar here at Bloomberg Pursuits. Highly recommend you head to Bloomberg.com and check this out. Nikki, thank you so much. This is Bloomberg.
This is the Bloomberg Business Week podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business App. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.